The crimson glow of dying stars reflected off the hull of the Defiance, as Captain Mark stared into the void that would soon become humanity's grave. Around him, the last remnants of Earth's defense fleet held formation, 300 ships against the combined might of 12 alien civilizations. The numbers were laughable, if laughter hadn't died in his throat months ago. "Sir, the Galactic Council's ultimatum expires in 6 hours, reported his communications officer, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Their fleet is holding position at the edge of the system." Mark nodded grimly. The Council's message had been clear. Humanity was deemed too dangerous to exist. Their rapid expansion, their refusal to submit to galactic law, their stubborn independence, all crimes worthy of extinction. Every human colony, every outpost, every ship would be reduced to cosmic dust. "Any word from the outer colonies?" Mark asked. "Nothing, sir. We have to assume they're gone." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Mark had fought in dozens of skirmishes against pirates and raiders. But this was different. This was the systematic elimination of his entire species by beings who claimed moral superiority while plotting genocide. A sharp beep from the sensor array broke the silence. "Captain, we're detecting an anomaly in the asteroid field. Something's awakening." Mark turned to face the tactical display. Deep within the cluster of space rocks that had once been humanity's first interstellar mining operation, energy readings spiked beyond anything their instruments could properly measure. The asteroids themselves began to shift, revealing geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "It's artificial," breathed the science officer. "Those aren't random asteroids. They're arranged in a perfect spiral formation. The energy signature is unlike anything in our databases." As they watched, a structure emerged from the heart of the formation. Ancient beyond measure, it resembled no human technology they knew. Yet something about its flowing lines and impossible angles felt familiar. Mark felt a stirring in his chest, a recognition that bypassed his conscious mind entirely. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the structure, but it's not coming through our communications array. It's coming through us." Mark felt it then. A voice that wasn't quite a voice, speaking in words that weren't quite words. Images flooded his mind, vast fleets moving between stars, beings of incredible power shaping worlds with their will alone, a civilization so advanced that physics bent to their desires. And the faces, human faces, but wrong somehow, too perfect, too knowing. "Children of our blood," the voice whispered in his mind. "Why do you flee from those you once commanded?" The crew around him staggered as the same vision struck them all. Mark watched his weapons officer's eyes widen with impossible knowledge, saw his navigator straighten with newfound purpose. Something was changing in them, in all of them. "Captain," his tactical officer said, her voice carrying harmonics that definitely hadn't been there moments before. "I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout human space. Every colony world, every outpost, they're all lighting up like stars." On the main screen, the alien fleets maintained their positions, unaware that something fundamental had shifted. The Galactic Council had expected to find the scattered remnants of a young species, easy prey for their overwhelming numbers. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping in human DNA for millions of years. Mark felt power coursing through his veins, ancient memories surfacing like oil on water. He remembered ruling from thrones of crystallized starlight, remembered when galaxies spun at his ancestors' command. The humans had given it all up once, choosing to start fresh, to let other species grow without the shadow of their dominance. But now those other species sought to extinguish them entirely. "Send a message to all human forces," Mark commanded, his voice carrying new authority. "Tell them the awakening has begun. Tell them it's time to remember what we really are." The beacon pulsed brighter, and across the galaxy, humanity began to stir. Dr. Lisa felt the change before her instruments registered it. In her laboratory aboard the research station Discovery, she had been analyzing tissue samples from the growing number of humans exhibiting unprecedented physical abilities. Now, as the genetic markers rearranged themselves before her eyes, she understood she was witnessing evolution in real time. "Impossible," she whispered, but the data streams didn't lie. Dormant sequences in human DNA were activating, unlocking capabilities that shouldn't exist. The double helix was restructuring itself, revealing hidden layers of information that made their previous understanding of genetics look primitive. Across the station, her research subjects were changing. Commander Peters, who had volunteered for testing after surviving what should have been fatal radiation exposure, now stood unprotected in a chamber filled with enough hard radiation to kill a dozen normal humans. He wasn't just immune, he was absorbing it, converting it into raw energy that made his skin glow with inner light. "Dr. Lisa," came a voice over the intercom. "You need to see the combat trials." She rushed to the observation deck overlooking the training facility. Below, Lieutenant Stone was sparring with 3 combat drones simultaneously. But this wasn't the careful, calculated fighting she'd seen before. Stone moved like liquid lightning, anticipating attacks that hadn't been programmed yet, striking with force that should have shattered his bones, but instead crushed reinforced titanium. "How long has he been fighting?" Lisa asked. 6 hours straight. He's not even breathing hard." As she watched, Stone's eyes began to glow with the same inner light she'd seen in Peters. The drones, designed to challenge enhanced soldiers, couldn't even track his movements. He wasn't just faster or stronger. He was operating on principles that defied conventional physics. Meanwhile, Admiral Kane stood in the Strategic Command Center of Luna Base, watching reports flood in from across human space. Every world was reporting the same phenomenon. Humans were changing, awakening to abilities that should have been impossible. "Sir, incoming priority transmission from the mining colony at Titan 7, his communications officer announced. The holographic display activated, showing a scene that made Kane's blood run cold, and then burn with pride. The mining complex was under attack by Vakari raiders, their crystalline ships bombarding the civilian population. But the miners weren't running. They were fighting back with their bare hands, tearing through battle armor like paper, their bodies shrugging off. Energy weapons that could melt stone. By the ancestors, Kane breathed, feeling the same fire ignite in his own veins. He had commanded fleets for 30 years, fought in a dozen campaigns, but he had never felt anything like this. Power flowed through him, ancient knowledge surfacing, like memories of dreams he'd never had. "Admiral," his aide said urgently, "the Galactic Council fleet is accelerating toward Earth. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. Kane smiled, and for the first time his aide stepped back in unconscious fear. There was something predatory in that smile, something that belonged to creatures who had once hunted among the stars. "Send word to all human forces," Kane commanded. "No more retreating. No more hiding. Today, we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten the children of the void." Across the Sol system, human ships began to move with new purpose. Their crews stood straighter, moved faster, thought clearer. In the engine rooms, human engineers made impossible modifications, pushing reactors beyond their theoretical limits. On the gun decks, human gunners achieved targeting solutions that would have required AI assistance just hours before. Dr. Lisa watched the readings spike on her instruments as the awakening accelerated. The genetic changes weren't random. They were following a pattern, unlocking sequences that had been carefully hidden in the human genome for eons. Someone, sometime in the distant past, had prepared humanity for this moment. "Doctor," Peters called from the radiation chamber, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in her bones. "I think I understand what's happening to us." "What?" she asked. "We're not evolving," he said, his eyes now burning with starfire. "We're remembering." The station shuddered as something vast and ancient stirred in the collective human consciousness. Across the galaxy, 12 alien civilizations were about to learn that they hadn't cornered desperate refugees. They had awakened sleeping gods. General Rex stood on the command deck of the battle cruiser Retribution, watching the impossible unfold across his tactical displays. 3 hours ago, the human colony at New Avalon had been defenseless against the Coran siege fleet. Now, the colonists were dismantling warships with their bare hands, moving through the vacuum of space as if it were their natural element. "Sir, the Coran Admiral is requesting immediate evacuation assistance," his communications officer reported, voice tight with disbelief. "They're calling it a humanitarian crisis." Rex almost laughed. The same species that had spent the morning bombarding civilian shelters was now begging for mercy from the very people they'd tried to slaughter. Through the tactical feed, he watched human colonists, Farmers, teachers, children, tear through battle armor like tissue paper, their bodies wreathed in energy that made sensors scream warnings. "Tell the Corans they can surrender," Rex said, feeling the familiar fire building in his chest. "Or, they can keep learning what humans are capable of when you threaten our families." The awakening had spread faster than anyone anticipated. Every human world was reporting the same phenomenon. Ordinary people transforming into something beyond the understanding of galactic science. The genetic triggers were activating in perfect synchronization, as if responding to some cosmic signal that had been dormant for millennia. On Gamma Station, Engineer Cole had been working frantically to repair battle damage when the change took him. One moment he was struggling with a plasma conduit that required a full repair team. The next, he was reshaping metal with his thoughts, his hands glowing with energy that welded quantum steel like clay. The station's reactor, damaged beyond hope of repair, suddenly hummed with perfect efficiency under his touch. "How is this possible?" demanded the station commander. Cole looked up from his work, his eyes reflecting depths of space that shouldn't exist in human anatomy. "We built these machines before," he said simply. "We're just remembering how." Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council's carefully orchestrated extermination campaign was crumbling. The thermal collective's siege of the agricultural world haven had turned into a rout when the human farmers discovered they could manipulate the planet's weather patterns with their collective will. Tornadoes and lightning storms, guided by human consciousness, had reduced the invasion fleet to scrap metal. The Vexari fleet attacking the mining colony at Kepler's Edge found themselves facing humans who could survive in hard vacuum, who moved between asteroids like dancers, who tore through their ship hulls with fingers that cut through quantum-hardened alloys. The miners, who had spent their lives breaking rocks in zero gravity, now broke warships with the same casual efficiency. Admiral Thane of the Galactic Council's primary fleet watched his tactical display with growing horror. Every engagement was ending the same way. Human forces that should have been overwhelmed were instead overwhelming their attackers with capabilities that violated every known law of physics. "Admiral," his aide whispered, "perhaps we should reconsider our position." "Reconsider?" Thane's tentacles writhed with agitation. "We've committed the entire Council fleet to this operation. We cannot simply—" The report from the Zephyrian assault force cut him off. The humans at the research colony had done more than repel the attack. They had somehow convinced the planet itself to fight alongside them. Mountains moved at their command, oceans rose to swallow ships, the very atmosphere became a weapon in their hands. "Sir," his tactical officer said, "urgently, we're receiving distress calls from 17 different battle groups. Human forces are—" "Sir, they're not just fighting back. They're hunting us." Thane studied the galactic display with mounting dread. Red markers, human forces, were moving with impossible speed between star systems. Ships that shouldn't be, capable of faster-than-light travel, were somehow crossing vast distances in hours rather than days, and wherever they appeared, Council forces were being systematically destroyed. On the bridge of the Retribution, General Rex felt the connection to his fellow humans strengthening. He could sense Admiral Kane's fleet moving toward Earth's defense, could feel Captain Mark's forces preparing for the final confrontation. More than that, he could sense something vast and ancient stirring in the collective human consciousness, memories of a time when they had ruled not just worlds, but the fundamental forces that shaped reality itself. "General," his aide said, softly. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Kane, Priority Alpha." Kane's image appeared in the hologram, but he looked different now. Taller somehow, more presence than physical form, his eyes holding depths that spoke of cosmic understanding. "Rex," Kane said, "it's time. The full awakening is beginning. Are your people ready?" Rex looked around his bridge crew, saw the same transformation in each of them. They stood straighter, moved with fluid grace, spoke with harmonic undertones that resonated in dimensions beyond the merely physical. They were becoming something more than human, or perhaps remembering what human had always meant. "We're ready," Rex replied. "Let's show the galaxy why they should have left sleeping gods alone." Commander Vale had been exploring dead worlds for 15 years, mapping the ruins of civilizations that had vanished long before humanity reached the stars. But as her archaeological team descended into the chambers beneath Kepler 442b's crimson surface, she realized they weren't studying alien ruins. They were walking through humanity's forgotten palace. The architectural patterns match Earth's ancient, megalithic sites, Dr. Kim reported, her scanner painting detailed images of corridors that stretched beyond their light's reach. But the construction methods. Commander, some of these stones are the size of small moons. No known technology could have moved them. Vale ran her hand along the wall, feeling familiar grooves worn smooth by countless touches. The stone hummed. Under her palm, recognizing something in her genetic signature. As the awakening spread through her blood, memories that weren't quite her own began to surface. We lived here, she whispered. Not as a species, as individuals. Some of us lived here. The team exchanged glances. Since the awakening began, they'd all been experiencing impossible memories. Visions of a time when humans commanded forces beyond current understanding. But this felt different, more personal. They descended deeper, following corridors that seemed to stretch toward the planet's core. Emergency lighting flickered on automatically as they passed, powered by systems that had waited millions of years for their creator's return. The walls began displaying holographic records, star charts showing galactic configurations from eons past, battle formations involving fleets that spanned solar systems, and at the center of it all, human figures, whose presence warped space around them. My God, breathed Dr. Kim. We weren't just part of galactic civilization. We were galactic civilization. The main chamber opened before them like a cathedral built for giants. Crystalline formations hung from the ceiling, each one containing what looked like frozen starlight. At the room's heart stood a throne carved from a single piece of what their scanners identified as compressed neutron star material. Matter so dense it should have collapsed into a black hole, held stable by technologies they couldn't begin to understand. Vale approached the throne, feeling pull she couldn't resist. As her hand touched its armrest, the chamber exploded into light. Holographic figures materialized around them, humans, but more than human, their forms radiating power that made the air itself sing with harmonics. You have awakened, a voice spoke directly into their minds. The children remember their birthright. The lead figure stepped forward, and Vale gasped. Despite the impossible perfection, despite the energy that wreathed him like living flame, she recognized the face. It was carved on Mount Rushmore, painted in the Sistine Chapel, sculpted in marble across Earth's museums. Humanity had been unconsciously preserving the memory of their true kings for millennia. We ruled the galaxy once, the figure continued. Every star that burns, every world that turns, every species that thinks, all existed under our dominion. We could have held power forever. Why didn't you? Vale asked aloud. Because power without growth becomes stagnation. We chose to sleep, to let our children forget, to allow other species to develop their own potential. We became ordinary humans, scattered across a single world, starting fresh. The implications staggered her. Every human alive was descended from beings who had literally shaped the cosmos to their will. The genetic potential had been locked away, waiting for the right trigger. The Galactic Council, Dr. Kim said. They don't know what they've awakened. They seek to extinguish the spark of creation itself, the ancient king replied. In doing so, they have forced us to remember fire. Across the galaxy, similar awakenings were occurring. On a dozen dead worlds, archaeological teams discovered the truth of humanity's past. Each revelation sent ripples through the collective human consciousness, unlocking more of their ancestral inheritance. Captain Nova, leading the defense of the outer colonies, felt the change as ancient knowledge flooded her mind. The enemy fleet approaching her position suddenly seemed laughably primitive. Their weapons, their tactics, their entire understanding of warfare belonged to species that had never grasped the fundamental truth. Reality was negotiable for those with sufficient will. All ships, she commanded, her voice carrying new authority. Assume formation Starfall 7. Her fleet captains didn't question orders they'd never heard before, but somehow understood perfectly. The human ships arranged themselves in a pattern that channeled gravitational forces, turning space itself into a weapon. When the alien fleet, Arrived, they found themselves caught in a web of twisted space-time that crushed their vessels like insects in amber. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Kane felt the full weight of ancestral memory settling into his consciousness. The approaching Council Armada represented 12 civilizations at the height of their power, but Kane remembered when humanity had commanded not 12, but 12,000 such civilizations. The genetic locks were dissolving, revealing capabilities that made gods of mortals. "Sir," his aide reported, "the alien fleet has begun broadcasting surrender requests." Kane smiled, and for the first time in eons, it was the smile of a being who remembered ruling stars. "Tell them," he said, "that their fate will be decided by creatures whose mercy they mistook for weakness. The children of the void are coming home." Fleet Admiral Blake stood in the command center of humanity's greatest fortress, watching as the final barriers dissolved in human genetic code. Around him, officers who had been ordinary military personnel hours before now moved with the fluid grace of beings who remembered commanding fundamental forces. The awakening had reached its crescendo, and with it came power that made physics merely a suggestion. "Admiral," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Ross, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through dimensions beyond the merely physical. "All human forces report full awakening achieved. We have capabilities we never imagined." Blake nodded, feeling the cosmic awareness settling into his consciousness like a long-forgotten memory finally returning. He could sense every human in the galaxy now, millions of minds linked by ancestry that stretched back to when their kind had first learned to harness the fundamental forces of creation. The genetic inheritance wasn't just about physical abilities. It was about understanding reality at its most basic level. Through the neural link that all awakened humans now shared, he felt Captain Nova's triumph as she single-handedly turned a gas giant into a weapon, its gravity well reaching out to crush an entire alien battle group. He sensed Commander Vale's archaeological team unlocking vaults of ancient technology that made current galactic civilization look like stone tools. Most powerfully, he felt the collective rage of his species finally understanding what they truly were. "The Galactic Council made one critical error," Blake said, his words rippling through space-time itself. "They assumed we were like them, a young species that developed naturally. They never suspected we were the children of the beings who created the very concept of galactic civilization." On the main display, the enemy forces were arrayed in all their might, 12,000 warships representing the combined military strength of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. It was the largest armada ever assembled, designed to extinguish humanity once and for all. But Blake could see the terror in their formation patterns, the desperate attempts to maintain distance from human forces that no longer needed to follow the conventional rules of space-time. "Sir," Lieutenant Ross said, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council's flagship. They're asking for terms." Blake laughed, and the sound made nearby stars flicker in resonance. "Now they want to negotiate? After centuries of condescension? After decades of restrictions? After systematic attempts to limit human expansion? Now, when they've actually declared genocide against us, they want to talk." The transmission activated, showing the 12 council members in their emergency session chamber. Blake recognized the species, the crystalline Vexari, the tentacled Korans, the energy beings called Luminous Ones. Each had once bowed before human ancestors, before the time of voluntary forgetting. "Admiral Blake," spoke Counselor Prime Thane, his translator struggling with harmonics of desperation. We were not aware of humanity's true nature. The historical records were lost, the genetic markers dormant. You believed we were weak," Blake interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic authority. "You mistook our chosen ignorance for natural limitation. You confused our peaceful nature with inability to wage war. Most fatally, you interpreted our mercy as permission to threaten our extinction." Through the quantum link shared by all awakened humans, Blake felt his people's response to the Council's fear. On 1,000 worlds, humans were demonstrating abilities that redefined the possible. They were restructuring matter at the atomic level, manipulating gravity like a tool, stepping between star systems as easily as walking between rooms. The Gyeon mining colonies were converting asteroids into fleets of ships that moved faster than light without engines. The agricultural worlds were directing stellar radiation to accelerate crop growth, feeding entire sectors from single planets. "Admiral," reported another officer, "human forces throughout the galaxy are requesting permission to demonstrate our full capabilities to the Council fleet." Blake considered this. The awakened humans could destroy the assembled armada in minutes, not through superior technology, but by exercising control over the fundamental forces that held their ships together. They could unravel the strong nuclear force in enemy reactors, convince gravity to reverse its pull on specific targets, or simply convince space itself to relocate hostile vessels into the hearts of nearby stars. But something deeper stirred in the collective human consciousness. These weren't just genetic memories activating. They were the accumulated wisdom of beings who had chosen to give up ultimate power once before. The ancestors' voices whispered through the quantum link, reminding their descendants why they had walked away from godhood in the first place. "Counselor Thane," Blake said finally, "you will order the immediate withdrawal of all Council forces to their home systems. You will broadcast an unconditional surrender to all human territories. And then you will wait while we decide whether the galaxy deserves the mercy our ancestors showed you once before." The alien leader's form shifted through colors that indicated extreme distress. "Admiral, surely we can reach some accommodation. You declared genocide against beings whose ancestors created the technological foundations your civilizations depend on," Blake replied. "You attempted to exterminate the species that once ruled every star you can see. The only reason your civilizations exist at all is because our forebears chose to step back and let you grow. Now you'll discover whether their children inherited their wisdom along with their power." As if summoned by his words, the quantum link suddenly blazed with new intensity. Across the galaxy, every awakened human felt the presence of something vast stirring in the collective unconscious. Not just genetic memory, but the actual consciousness of their ancestors, preserved in the quantum foam itself, awakening for the first time in millions of years. The final phase of humanity's return was about to begin. Captain Nova felt it first. A presence vast beyond comprehension stirring in the depths of human consciousness. Around her, the bridge crew of the Stellar Wrath stumbled as something that transcended individual identity flowed through the quantum link connecting all awakened humans. The ship itself responded, its hull reshaping into configurations that belonged to technologies lost since the dawn of galactic civilization. "Captain," her navigator whispered, "I can see everything. Every star, every world, every possible path through space-time. It's like the universe is showing us its blueprint." Nova nodded, understanding flooding through her as the ancestral consciousness fully merged with present awareness. This wasn't just genetic memory anymore. The actual minds of humanity's godlike ancestors were awakening, preserved in quantum fields that existed between dimensions. They had been sleeping, waiting for their descendants to need them enough to call them back from whatever realm beings of such power inhabited after physical death. Through the enhanced awareness, Nova could perceive the true scope of what was happening. The Galactic Council's fleet, still maintaining position at the edge of human space, was about to face beings who had ruled when galaxies were young. More than that, they were about to face the collective will of a species that had chosen to give up absolute power once, and now had to decide whether to reclaim it permanently. "Children," a voice spoke through every human mind simultaneously, ancient beyond measure, yet familiar as a parent's lullaby. "We kept vigil in the spaces between worlds, waiting for this moment. The time of hiding is over." Admiral Kane, commanding Earth's defense grid, felt his consciousness expand to encompass solar systems. The approaching alien armada was visible to him not just as ships and weapons, but as mathematical probabilities that could be adjusted with sufficient will. He could see the quantum structures holding their vessels together, the gravitational threads connecting their formation, the electromagnetic patterns their brains used for thought. "Admiral," his aide reported, voice filled with awe, "the alien fleet is changing course. They're retreating at maximum speed." Kane smiled, feeling the presence of ancestors who had once commanded fleets spanning galactic arms. They can sense what's awakening. Their primitive sensors can't measure it, but some instinct is telling them they're in the presence of their former masters. The awakening was no longer limited to physical transformation. Humans across the galaxy were accessing memories that stretched back to the universe's youth, when their ancestors had first learned to manipulate the fundamental forces. They remembered building Dyson spheres around entire star clusters, remembered conversations with entities made of pure energy, remembered the day they chose to step back and let other species develop their own potential. But they also remembered why that choice had been necessary. Dr. Lisa, still analyzing the genetic changes in her laboratory, gasped as ancient knowledge flooded her consciousness. The human genome wasn't just unlocking dormant abilities. It was accessing quantum information stored in the structure of space-time itself. Every human was becoming a living archive of technologies and wisdoms that predated current galactic civilization by millions of years. The council species, she realized aloud. They're our children. Not biologically, but we guided their evolution. We seeded their worlds, nudged their development, gave them the tools to build civilizations. And now they've tried to kill their own creators. The implications were staggering. Every species in the Galactic Council owed their existence to human intervention. The Vexari's crystalline biology had been enhanced by human genetic engineering. The Quran's advanced mathematics came from equations left in their planet's quantum field. The luminous ones were the result of a human experiment in consciousness transfer that had succeeded beyond all expectation. Counselor Prime Thane, aboard the Council flagship Harmony, watched his tactical displays with growing horror. The human ships weren't just retreating anymore. They were transforming. Crystalline structures were growing from their hulls. Energy patterns that hurt to look at directly were surrounding them like halos, and they were moving through space in ways that suggested they no longer needed propulsion systems. Counselor, his aide whispered, our historians have found references in the deep archives. Ancient texts that speak of the Makers, beings who shaped the early galaxy, who guided the development of civilization itself. Thane's multiple hearts sank. The texts were considered mythology, stories told by primitive civilizations to explain their rapid technological development. But the descriptions matched exactly what they were seeing. Beings who could manipulate matter and energy at will, who moved between stars as easily as walking, who commanded forces that made current technology look like carved sticks. Open a channel to the human flagship, Thane ordered. Full diplomatic protocols. We need to surrender before they decide we're too dangerous to allow continued existence. But when the channel opened, the face that appeared wasn't entirely human anymore. Fleet Admiral Blake stood wreathed in energy that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception, his eyes reflecting the depths of intergalactic space. When he spoke, harmonics resonated through every quantum field in the local area. Counselor Thane, Blake said, you and your allies attempted genocide against the species that created you. You tried to exterminate the beings whose mercy allowed your civilizations to exist. Now you will learn whether their children are as forgiving as their ancestors. Behind Blake, the bridge of his flagship had transformed into something that belonged in the palaces of cosmic emperors. His crew moved with fluid grace that spoke of perfect harmony with the fundamental forces, their forms beginning to transcend purely physical existence. The trial of the Galactic Council, Blake announced, will now begin. The galaxy held its breath as humanity's true nature was finally revealed in all its terrible glory. Above Earth, the assembled human fleet no longer looked like anything built by mortal hands. Ships had become flowing structures of crystallized starlight, their hulls pulsing with energies that existed in dimensions beyond normal space-time. The crews aboard them were transforming as well, their forms becoming more presence than flesh, their consciousness expanding to encompass cosmic understanding. Admiral Kane stood in what had once been a standard command center but now resembled the throne room of beings who commanded reality itself. Around him, officers who had awakened to their true nature moved through tasks that involved restructuring local spacetime, coordinating defensive grids that spanned multiple solar systems, and maintaining quantum links with human forces scattered across the galaxy. Sir, reported Commander Torres, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through parallel dimensions. The Galactic Council's surrender has been received by all human forces. They're requesting terms. Kane nodded, feeling the collective consciousness of his species weighing the decision. Through the quantum link, he could sense every awakened human in the galaxy. Millions of minds connected by genetic heritage that stretched back to when they had first learned to harness fundamental forces. The ancestral memories were fully active now, showing them what they had once been and what they could become again. But more than memory was stirring. The actual consciousness of their godlike ancestors, preserved in quantum fields beyond normal perception, was merging with present awareness. These weren't just genetic echoes. These were the living minds of beings who had ruled when galaxies were young, awakening after eons of patient waiting. "The choice is before us once more," spoke a voice that resonated through every human consciousness. Ancient beyond measure, yet infinitely familiar. Power absolute, or wisdom tempered by mercy. Dominion eternal, or the harder path of guidance and restraint. Captain Nova, commanding the outer defense perimeter, felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders. Through enhanced perception, she could see the true scope of what humanity had become. They weren't just recovering lost abilities. They were evolving into something that transcended physical existence itself. The genetic locks hadn't just hidden power. They had contained the potential for humanity to become the shepherds of reality. "Captain," her tactical officer reported, "incoming transmission from Admiral Blake. He's calling a general assembly." The quantum link blazed with new intensity as every awakened human in the galaxy connected to a single shared consciousness. Blake's presence dominated the network, but behind him stood something even more vast: the collective will of ancestors who had once shaped the universe to their desire. "My fellow humans," Blake began, his words rippling through dimensions, "we stand at the threshold of reclaiming our birthright. The species that sought to exterminate us now tremble before what we have become. The question is no longer whether we can defeat them, it's whether we should become what we once were." Through the link, every human could feel the scope of their potential. They could reshape matter at the atomic level, manipulate gravity like a tool, step between star systems as easily as walking through doorways. More than that, they could command the fundamental forces that held reality together. The Galactic Council's fleets weren't just outnumbered, they were facing beings who could convince physics itself to abandon their enemies. General Rex, leading the liberation of the outer colonies, felt the temptation wash over him. Why show mercy to species that had attempted genocide? Why not reclaim the galactic throne their ancestors had voluntarily abdicated? The power was there, waiting to be fully embraced. But then another voice joined the quantum chorus. Older, deeper, carrying the weight of cosmic wisdom earned through eons of existence. "We chose to sleep once before," the ancient consciousness whispered. "Not from weakness, but from understanding. Power without growth becomes stagnation. Dominion without challenge breeds decay. We stepped back to let our children, all our children, develop their own potential." Images flooded the human consciousness. The galaxy, as it had been under their ancestors' rule, perfect and static, and slowly dying from lack of genuine challenge. The decision to fragment their power, scatter their genetics, and start fresh had been motivated by love, not weakness. Dr. Lisa, monitoring the transformation from her research station, felt tears streaming down her face as she understood the full scope of their ancestors' sacrifice. They had given up godhood so that other species could grow, could develop their own unique potential, could contribute something new to the cosmic symphony. The Galactic Council species weren't enemies. They were humanity's greatest achievement, proof that the sacrifice had been worthwhile. "But they tried to destroy us," Admiral Kane said through the quantum link, voicing the anger that burned in every human heart. "Fear," replied the ancestral consciousness. "They feared what they didn't understand, just as mortals have always feared the divine. The question is whether we will respond with the wisdom that once made us worthy of power, or with the anger that would make us tyrants." Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council fleets maintained their desperate retreat, but they couldn't outrun beings who had learned to manipulate spacetime itself. On the Council flagship, Counselor Prime Thane stared at readings that defied comprehension. The human forces weren't pursuing. They were simply appearing wherever they chose, as if distance had become irrelevant. "Counselor," his aide whispered, "we're receiving a transmission from the human flagship. Admiral Blake is requesting a formal audience." The main display activated, showing Blake surrounded by beings who had transcended purely physical existence. But when he spoke, his voice carried not the rage of the wronged, but the patience of the eternal. Counselor Thane, Blake said. Your species and their allies attempted to commit genocide against humanity. Under the old laws, our ancestors' laws, this would mean the complete dissolution of your civilizations. Every world stripped of life, every star in your territories extinguished, every trace of your existence erased from the cosmic record. Thane's crystalline form flickered with terror. The human was describing capabilities that shouldn't exist, yet the energy readings from their ships confirmed they possessed exactly such power. However, Blake continued, our ancestors chose a different path once before. They stepped back from absolute power, because they understood something fundamental about existence itself. Growth requires challenge. Evolution demands struggle. Perfection achieved through dominion is not perfection at all. It's death. Commander Vale, still exploring the ancient ruins that had revealed humanity's true history, felt the decision crystallizing in the collective consciousness. The archaeological evidence was overwhelming. Their ancestors had ruled for millions of years, had achieved a level of technological and spiritual development that bordered on omniscience. But they had also recognized that their very perfection was becoming a prison, not just for themselves, but for every other form of life in the galaxy. We offer you a choice, Blake announced, his words echoing across every inhabited world in the galaxy. You can continue as you have been. 12 separate species, each limited by your own perspectives and prejudices. Or you can accept what you truly are. Our children, created by our guidance, shaped by our care, and destined for something greater than any of you can achieve alone. The quantum link pulsed with collective human will as the decision was made, not through debate or argument, but through the same intuitive understanding that had once guided their ancestors to voluntary abdication. They would not reclaim the throne of the galaxy. They would offer to share it. The age of the Galactic Council ends today, Blake declared. In its place, we offer the Confederation of Guided Worlds. 12 species working together under human guidance, each contributing their unique strengths, each growing toward their maximum potential. Your civilizations will not be destroyed or subjugated. They will be elevated. Captain Nova felt the rightness of the decision resonating through her enhanced consciousness. This was why their ancestors had possessed such incredible power. Not because they sought to dominate, but because they understood that true strength came from lifting others up. The genetic inheritance wasn't just about abilities. It was about the wisdom to use those abilities responsibly. But know this, Blake's voice carried new authority, as the full weight of ancestral memory settled into his words. Humanity will no longer hide what we are. We will no longer pretend to be just another young species struggling to find our place among the stars. We are your creators, your guides, and when necessary, your judges. The mercy we showed you today will not be offered again if you choose to threaten innocent life. The transformation was complete. Across the galaxy, humans stood revealed as the heirs to cosmic power beyond imagination. But instead of using that power to crush their enemies, they had chosen the harder path. To guide, to teach, and to ensure that the universe continued to grow towards something greater than any single species could achieve alone. Counselor Thane, staring at the transformed human fleet, finally understood what his people had truly attempted. They hadn't just declared war on another species. They had tried to murder the gardeners of reality itself. The fact that they were still alive, still breathing, still capable of choosing a different path, was itself a demonstration of power beyond their comprehension. Admiral Blake, Thane said, his voice carrying new humility. We accept your offer. All 12 Council species formally request membership in your confederation. We place ourselves under human guidance, as our ancestors apparently did in ages past. Blake smiled, and for the first time since the awakening began, it was purely human, warm, welcoming, and tinged with the pride of a parent watching their children take their first steps towards something magnificent. Welcome home, he said. Welcome to the beginning of what we were always meant to build together. As the human fleets moved to escort the former Council Armada toward a new age of cooperation, the galaxy itself seemed to pulse with approval. The descendants of sleeping gods had awakened not to rule, but to guide, and in choosing wisdom over dominion, They had proven themselves worthy inheritors of the most precious gift their ancestors could have left them: the knowledge that true power lay not in what you could destroy, but in what you chose to create. The age of humanity's return had begun, and the stars themselves sang with the promise of what was to come.